When basketball legend Michael Jordan returns to Wilmington 50 years after his family's own. Painful eviction. He buys back their old house for 3 times its value. The neighborhood buzzes with curiosity as workers transform the rundown building into an exact replica of how it looked in 1971. But why is the famous athlete so obsessed with perfectly recreating every detail of his childhood home? And what secret plan does he have that will gather his former neighbors together and leave everyone, even the toughest among them, in tears? Michael Jordan tapped his fingers on the steering wheel as he drove slowly down Maple Street. The neighborhood had changed over the decades, some houses freshly painted, others worn down by time. But the feelings that stirred inside him felt exactly the same as they did 50 years ago. He pulled his sleek black SUV to a stop in front of 1714 Maple Street. The modest 2-story house with peeling blue paint and a crooked front porch stood out among the better-kept homes. Michael sat motionless, staring at it through the windshield. The basketball legend, now in his 60s, with silver sprinkled through his short hair, felt like a 9-year-old boy again. "This is it," he whispered to himself. "This is where it all changed." Michael stepped out of his vehicle, his knees creaking slightly, a reminder of countless games and gravity-defying leaps. A few neighbors peeked through their windows, probably wondering why someone in such expensive clothes was standing in front of the neighborhood's most run-down house. The memories hit him like a wave. His mother, Dolores, sitting at the kitchen table, tears streaming down her face as she clutched an eviction notice. His father, James, silently packing their belongings into cardboard boxes, his usual smile nowhere to be found. Young Michael clutching his first basketball, a gift from his dad, as they walked away from the only home he'd ever known. Taking a deep breath, Michael walked up the cracked concrete path and climbed the 3 steps to the porch. Each step creaked under his weight. He straightened his shoulders and knocked on the door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then he heard shuffling inside. The door opened a crack, secured by a chain lock. "Whatever you're selling, I don't want any," came a raspy voice. "I'm not selling anything, ma'am," Michael replied gently. "My name is Michael Jordan. I used to live in this house when I was a boy." The door closed. Michael heard the chain sliding. Then the door opened wider. A tiny woman, with wispy white hair and glasses too big for her face, looked up at him. Her eyes widened in recognition. "Good Lord," she gasped. "You're really him, aren't you? The basketball player?" Michael nodded. "Yes, ma'am. And you are?" "Beatrice Simmons, Mrs. Simmons to most." She clutched her faded housecoat tighter. "I've lived here for 18 years now. Never thought I'd have a celebrity on my porch." "May I come in? I'd like to talk to you about something important." Mrs. Simmons hesitated, then stepped aside. "Excuse the mess. My arthritis makes cleaning difficult these days." Michael ducked his head as he entered. The ceiling seemed lower than he remembered. The living room was cluttered with old furniture, stacks of magazines, and 3 cats sleeping in various spots. The house smelled of mothballs and cat food. "Would you like some tea?" Mrs. Simmons offered. "No, thank you, ma'am. I won't take much of your time." Michael's eyes scanned the room, mentally removing the current furnishings and replacing them with the simple sofa his mother had kept covered in plastic. The old television set his father had repaired countless times. The bookshelf where his school books were neatly lined up. Mrs. Simmons, I'm here because this house means a great deal to me. My family lived here until I was 9, when we were evicted. That day changed everything for me. The old woman lowered herself carefully into a worn armchair. I had no idea. The real estate agent never mentioned anything about the famous Michael Jordan living here. Michael smiled slightly. I wasn't famous then, just a skinny kid who couldn't beat his brother at basketball. He sat on the edge of a cluttered sofa, moving aside a pile of crochet work. Mrs. Simmons, I'd like to buy this house from you. Her thin eyebrows shot up. Buy it? But why? It's falling apart. Surely you live somewhere much nicer now. I do, Michael admitted, but this place has been in my thoughts for 50 years. I'd like to restore it, make it exactly how it was. And I'm prepared to offer you 3 times what it's worth. Mrs. Simmons's hand flew to her throat. 3 times? But why would you do that? Michael leaned forward. Because some things are worth more than money, and because it looks like you could use it. Mrs. Simmons's eyes welled with tears. The truth is, I've been falling behind. Property taxes keep going up, and my medical bills, she trailed off, embarrassed. Then, it sounds like this might be good timing for both of us, Michael said kindly. 20 minutes later, after discussing details and exchanging contact information, Mrs. Simmons agreed to sell. Michael promised his lawyer would handle everything, and she could take all the time she needed to find a new place. A better place. As Mrs. Simmons went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, Michael wandered through the small living room alone. He ran his fingers along a door frame where faded pencil marks still showed the heights of children. Not his family's measurements, but perhaps Mrs. Simmons' grandchildren. Soon, very soon, he would restore these walls to exactly how they were when the Jordan family lived here. Every detail would be perfect, down to the last scratch on the door frame where his own growth had been recorded year by year. I'm coming back home, he whispered to the empty room. And this time, nobody's going to make us leave. 3 weeks later, Michael stood on the same porch, now holding a set of keys that were officially his. Mrs. Simmons had moved into a beautiful condo closer to her daughter, paid for in full with Michael's generous offer. The house stood empty, waiting for its transformation. Michael had made dozens of calls, rejected several famous designers, and finally found someone who understood what he needed. Olivia Hernandez, a local contractor known for historical preservation work. Mr. Jordan? A voice called from behind him. I'm Olivia. Sorry, I'm late. Michael turned to see a woman in her 40s, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She carried a worn leather notebook and had a pencil tucked behind her ear. Please, call me Michael. He extended his hand. Thank you for coming. Olivia's firm handshake told him she was used to being underestimated in a male-dominated field. I was surprised to get your call. I usually work on historic buildings, not... She looked at the tea house, clearly searching for a polite word. Not run-down family homes? Michael finished with a smile. That's exactly why I chose you. This isn't just any house. I need someone who cares about every detail. They entered together. The house was now empty of Mrs. Simmons's belongings, revealing water stains on the ceiling and cracks in the walls. Before we discuss renovations, I need you to understand something, Michael said. I don't want to modernize this place. I want to restore it, exactly as it was in 1971. Olivia raised an eyebrow. That's unusual. Most people want to update, not go backwards. This isn't about resale value, Michael explained. It's about preserving memories. As they walked through the small house, Michael's mind filled with ghosts from the past. In the kitchen, he stopped and smiled. "This is where my mother taught me to cook," he said, pointing to a space beside the old stove. "She'd drag a chair over so I could reach the counter. Said every man should know how to feed himself." Olivia made notes, watching him curiously. In what had been his parents' bedroom, Michael pointed to the ceiling. There was a leak right there. One night, during a thunderstorm, it got so bad that my father climbed onto the roof in the pouring rain to fix it. My mother was furious, but he just said, "A man takes care of his home." Michael, remember that. They continued to the small bedroom Michael had shared with his brother. "Larry and I slept in bunk beds right here," Michael said, standing in the middle of the empty room. "He always took the top bunk. Said the bottom was for babies." Michael laughed softly. "Every night, he'd tell me stories about basketball legends, guys like Wilt Chamberlain and Oscar Robertson. Said if I practiced hard enough, maybe someday people would tell stories about me too." Olivia scribbled in her notebook. "You really remember all these details from 50 years ago?" Michael nodded. "Some memories burn themselves into your mind, especially when they're all you have left." They went out to the backyard, overgrown now with weeds. Michael walked to a spot near an old oak tree and pointed. The basketball hoop was right here. My father installed it. It wasn't fancy, just a wooden backboard with a rim that wasn't quite regulation height. But it was mine. His voice grew distant. "Larry would beat me here, game after game. I'd end up in tears sometimes, but I kept coming back. That hoop needs to be exactly the same, down to the slightly bent rim." Olivia stopped writing and looked at Michael directly. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why are you doing this? You could build a palace with your resources. Why pour money into recreating a house that, forgive me for saying this, represents a painful time in your life?" Michael considered her question. Sometimes to heal old wounds, you have to go back to where they started. This project isn't about the house itself, but what happens inside it. Olivia nodded slowly, still confused, but sensing the importance to her client. "I'll need photographs, detailed descriptions, anything you have that shows how it used to look." "I've been collecting references for years," Michael said. "Everything from family photos to interviews with neighbors. Every paint color, every doorknob, every creak in the floorboards. Everything needs to be exactly the same." As Olivia walked the perimeter, measuring and taking photos with her phone, Michael knelt down near the oak tree. Something caught his eye in the dirt. He brushed away soil with his fingers and pulled out a small plastic object. It was a toy soldier, its green paint chipped, but still recognizable. His favorite childhood toy, the one he'd cried over for days after their eviction, certain it was lost forever. Michael closed his hand around it, the tiny figure pressing into his palm. Some things, it seemed, were patient enough to wait 50 years to be found again. News traveled fast in Wilmington. By the end of the week, everyone knew that Michael Jordan had bought his childhood home. Local TV vans parked across the street. Reporters tried to peek through the newly installed security fence. Michael's team politely but firmly turned away all interview requests. "Mr. Jordan wishes for privacy during this personal project," was all they would say. Construction began immediately. Trucks arrived with materials. Workers came and went. Olivia. Hernandez supervised everything, checking each detail against Michael's specifications. Curious neighbors watched the activity, wondering why the famous basketball player would invest so much in such an ordinary house. Across the street lived 14-year-old Dexter Washington, who watched the renovation with special interest. Every day after school, he would sit on his front steps, homework balanced on his knees, eyes rarely, leaving the house across the way. Dexter dreamed of basketball greatness. His bedroom walls were covered with posters of NBA stars, Michael Jordan front and center. He practiced whenever he could at the community court. 6 blocks away, but his family couldn't afford proper training or even decent shoes. His prized possession was a pair of Air Jordans he'd saved for months to buy from a thrift store. They were 3 years old and 1 size too big, but Dexter wore them proudly, stuffing the toes with newspaper. On a warm Tuesday afternoon, a delivery truck pulled up to Michael's house. The driver struggled with a heavy vintage sofa. "Need a hand?" Dexter called from across the street. The driver looked over, clearly relieved. "That'd be great, kid." Dexter jogged across the street. Together, they managed to maneuver the sofa up the porch steps. As they entered the house, Dexter's eyes widened. The interior looked nothing like a modern celebrity home. Instead, it was like stepping into a time capsule from the 1970s, from the avocado green kitchen appliances to the wood-paneled walls in the living room. "Where do you want it?" the driver asked, interrupting Dexter's amazed inspection. "In here?" came a deep voice. Michael Jordan himself appeared in the doorway, dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, looking more like a regular person than the legend on Dexter's wall. His eyes fell on Dexter, noticing the worn Air Jordans on the boy's feet. "Nice shoes," Michael said with a small smile. Dexter's face flushed. "Thanks, Mr. Jordan. They're your brand." "I can see that." Michael nodded toward a spot in the living room. "The sofa goes against that wall." After they positioned the furniture, the driver left with a grateful wave. Dexter stood awkwardly, trying not to stare at his hero. "You live across the street?" Michael asked. "Yes, sir. With my mom and little sister." "Been there long?" "All my life," Dexter replied. "My grandma owned the house before us." Michael considered this. "So your grandmother would have been here when my family lived in this house?" "I guess so. She passed away last year." Michael's expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that." He glanced at Dexter's worn shoes. Again. "You play?" Dexter nodded eagerly. "Whenever I can. I'm trying to make varsity next year." "What position?" "Point guard. I'm not tall enough for anything else." Michael grinned. "Height isn't everything. It's heart that counts." He walked to the kitchen, returning with 2 glasses of lemonade. "You helped with the sofa. The least I can offer is a drink." Dexter accepted the glass, trying to control his trembling hands. He'd dreamed of meeting Michael Jordan since he first learned to dribble a ball, but never imagined it would happen in his own neighborhood. "Everyone's wondering," Dexter said, gathering his courage. "Why are you fixing up this old house? You could live anywhere." Michael took a slow sip before answering. "Sometimes you have to go back to move forward." Dexter frowned, not understanding. "This house is where everything changed for me." Michael continued. "My family was evicted when I was about your age. We had to leave with whatever we could pack in our car." He looked around the living room. "That day taught me that nothing in life is guaranteed. If you want something, You have to work harder than everyone else." Dexter nodded, thinking of his own daily practice sessions, often alone on the cracked court. "Let me see your hands," Michael said suddenly. Confused, Dexter held them out. Michael turned them over, examining the calluses. "Good. You're putting in the work." Michael walked to the door. "Come outside for a minute." In the driveway, Michael picked up a basketball that had been sitting by the steps. He demonstrated a dribbling technique, the ball a blur between his fingers despite his age. "Try it," he said, passing the ball to Dexter. Dexter attempted to copy the move, fumbling at first. Michael corrected his hand position patiently. "Practice that every day. It'll improve your ball control." Dexter's face glowed with pride. "I will, sir. Thank you." As Dexter reluctantly prepared to leave, clutching the basketball Michael had insisted he keep, he noticed a black car pulling up. A young man in a suit stepped out, carrying a thick folder. "Mr. Jordan, I've compiled the information you requested," the man said. "Thanks, Trey." Michael turned to Dexter. "See you around, young man. Keep working on that dribble." Dexter crossed the street, hugging the basketball to his chest. Through his open window, he could hear Michael's voice clearly in the quiet evening air. "I need you to locate everyone who lived on this street between 1971 and 1975, Michael was saying. "Everyone!" Dexter stopped, basketball still clutched to his chest. What exactly was Michael Jordan planning? Over the next 3 weeks, the renovation accelerated. Olivia's crew worked from dawn until dusk, transforming the house with meticulous attention to detail. Neighbors watched in fascination as vintage appliances, period-correct furniture, and even a 1970s television set were delivered. Michael visited daily, inspecting every detail. When the kitchen linoleum pattern wasn't exactly right, he had it, torn out and replaced. When the shade of green paint in the bathroom was slightly off, he ordered it repainted. Olivia's crew had never seen such precision demanded. "It's like he's building a museum, not a house," one worker commented. Inside his temporary apartment nearby, Michael met with his assistant, Trey Coleman. A sharp young man with a talent. For research, Trey had spent countless hours tracking down former residents of Maple Street. "I've got your list, Mr. Jordan," Trey said, sliding a folder across the table. "Finding people from 50 years ago wasn't easy, but I'm confident it's complete." Michael opened the folder and studied the list of names. Many were familiar, memories flooding back as he read each one. Mr. Patterson, the grumpy old man who yelled whenever a basketball landed in his prized tomato garden. Michael remembered sneaking onto his property at night to retrieve balls, heart pounding with the thrill of the mission. Mrs. Wilson, the sweet elderly lady who handed out popsicles on hot summer days. She always saved the grape ones for Michael because she knew they were his favorite. The Cooper twins, Jason and Jacob, 2 years older than Michael, they dominated the neighborhood basketball games and never let Michael play because he was too small. Their rejection had fueled his determination to improve. Michael ran his finger down the list, noting that many had passed away. Others had moved far from Wilmington, but 23 names were marked as located with current addresses and phone numbers. 23, Michael murmured. "My old Jersey number." "Coincidence," Trey said with a smile. "I don't believe in coincidences," Michael replied. "What? About that woman I mentioned? The girl who lived 2 houses down. My sister's friend." Trey flipped through his notes. "Zoe Mitchell? Yes, she's on the list. Actually, she still lives in Wilmington." works as a social worker downtown. Michael raised his eyebrows. She never left? According to my research, she moved away for college, but came back to care for her mother, who had cancer. After her mother passed, she stayed. Michael nodded slowly. I remember her. She was always reading books. Smartest kid on the block. Tres Points pulled out a photograph. This is her now. The picture showed a black woman in her early 60s with short gray hair and kind eyes behind stylish glasses. Though 5 decades had passed, Michael could still see traces of the serious little girl who had been his sister's best friend. I want to contact her first, Michael decided. May I ask why? What's this all about? Trey had worked for Michael for 3 years, but had never seen him so invested in a project. Michael leaned back, considering how much to share. When my family was evicted, we didn't just lose a house. We lost our community. 50 years later, I've accomplished more than I ever dreamed possible. But there's still something missing. He tapped the list. These people were witnesses to where I started. I need them to be part of where I'm going. Trey nodded, though he still didn't fully understand. Should I arrange a meeting with Ms. Mitchell? No. Send her this. Michael handed Trey a cream-colored envelope. It's an invitation to visit the house next Friday at 4 p.m. Just her, for now. Later that week, Zoe Mitchell sat at her desk in the Wilmington Family Services office, reviewing case files. At 59, she had dedicated her life to helping families in crisis, particularly those facing housing insecurity. Her colleagues called her the housing whisperer for her ability to find solutions for seemingly impossible situations. When her assistant brought in the mail, Zoe almost missed the cream-colored envelope among the bills and official letters. The handwriting on the front was unfamiliar. There was no return you address. Inside, she found a simple card with an address she recognized immediately, 1714 Maple Street. Below it was a date and time, and the message, "The past is waiting. MJ." Zoe frowned, turning the card over. MJ? Michael? Jordan? She had heard rumors that he'd bought his old house in her childhood neighborhood, but hadn't paid much attention. Why would he contact her? Memories surfaced of the skinny boy who lived down the street, her best friend's little brother, who was always bouncing a basketball. She remembered the day his family was evicted, watching from her bedroom window as they loaded their belongings into an old station wagon. She had cried that night, missing her friend Roslyn and wondering where they had gone. For days, Zoe debated whether to go. Her cautious nature made her suspicious of mysterious invitations, but curiosity ultimately won out. The following Friday, she parked her sensible sedan across from 1714 Maple Street, stunned by the transformation. The house looked exactly as she remembered it from her childhood. Right, down to the blue paint and white trim. If she squinted, she could almost see Mrs. Jordan hanging laundry in the side yard, or Mr. Jordan washing their car on Sunday afternoons. Zoe checked her watch, 3:58 p.m. For a moment, she considered driving away. What could Michael Jordan possibly want with her after all these years? What connection could they still have, other than once living on the same street? She took a deep breath and stepped out of her car. As she approached the house, memories became stronger with each step. She remembered running up this same sidewalk to pick up Roslyn for school, sitting on this porch, eating popsicles and trading stickers. The familiar ache of childhood friendships, lost to time and circumstance, washed over her. Zoe stood at the door, her finger hovering over the doorbell. Before she could press it, the door swung open. And there stood Michael Jordan, looking both familiar and strange. The boy she remembered, now transformed by time and fame, yet with the same intense eyes she recalled from childhood. "Zoe Mitchell," he said, with a hint of a smile. "You're right on time. You always were." Zoe blinked, surprised he remembered such a detail about her. "Hello, Michael," she replied, trying to match his casual tone despite her racing heart. "It's been a long time." 50 years. He stepped back, holding the door open. "Please, come in." Zoe entered and gasped. The interior was an exact replica of how the Jordan home had looked in the early 1970s, from the burnt orange curtains to the brown plaid sofa to the rabbit-eared television set in the corner. Even the family photos on the wall had been recreated. "This is unbelievable," she whispered, turning slowly to take it all in. "It's like stepping into a time machine." "That's the idea." Michael watched her reaction carefully. "Would you like a tour?" He led her through the house, room by room. In the kitchen, Zoe ran her fingers along the avocado green countertops, remembering afternoons spent watching Mrs. Jordan bake cookies. "Your mother always gave us graham crackers with peanut butter," Zoe said, the memory suddenly vivid. "Roslyn and I would sit at this table doing homework while your mom cooked dinner." Michael nodded, pleased she remembered. Mom believed in feeding the neighborhood. Said, "No child should study on an empty stomach." In the small bedroom that Yedidan had belonged to Michael's sisters, Zoe laughed. "Roslyn and I used to practice dance routines in here. We thought we were going to be famous dancers someday." "I remember," Michael said. "You two made me and Larry be your audience. You'd charge us a nickel to watch. And you always complained about paying." Zoe's eyes crinkled with laughter. As they continued through the house, the years between them seemed to melt away. Their shared memories created a bridge across time. Two children now in their 60s, but connected by the same geography of childhood. In Michael's old bedroom, he pointed to a shelf. "I kept my first trophy there. It wasn't even for basketball, it was for perfect attendance at school." "Your father was so proud of that," Zoe recalled. "He showed it to everyone who visited." Michael's expression softened at the mention of his father. Dad always said showing up was half the battle in life. They made their way back to the living room, where Michael had set out lemonade and cookies on the coffee table. Just like his mother used to serve visitors. "This must have cost a fortune," Zoe said, glancing around at the perfectly recreated space. "Not just buying the house, but all this restoration." Michael shrugged. "Money doesn't mean much if you don't use it for things that matter." Zoe reached into her purse and pulled out a small woven bracelet, faded with age, but still intact. "I kept this all these years. Do you remember it?" Michael took the bracelet, turning it over in his hands. "I made this in art class. Gave it to you before we moved?" Zoe nodded. "You said it was so I wouldn't forget you." Her voice grew soft. "I never did." A comfortable silence fell between them, the kind only possible between people who share history. Finally, Zoe asked the question that had been on her mind since receiving his invitation. "Why did you bring me here, Michael? Why now, after all? These years?" Instead of answering directly, Michael stood. "There's something else I want to show you." He led her upstairs to a room that hadn't existed in the original house, an addition built into what had once been attic space. He unlocked the door with a key from his pocket and stepped aside so Zoe could enter first. She stepped inside and froze. The walls were covered with photographs, hundreds of them, showing children and families from their old neighborhood. Newspaper clippings, maps, and timelines filled the spaces between photos. A large table in the center held a detailed model of E. Their entire street as it had looked in the 1970s, every house perfectly recreated in miniature. "What is this?" Zoe asked, moving slowly around the room, examining the elaborate display. "This is Phase 1, Michael replied. "Phase 1 of what?" Michael walked to one wall covered with what looked like a detective's investigation board. Red pins connected, photographs to locations on a large map of Wilmington. "When we were evicted," he explained, "it wasn't just about losing our house. We lost our community, our sense of belonging." He touched a photo of his family standing on the front porch. "That day changed me forever. It gave me a hunger that helped me succeed, but it also left a hole that no championship, no amount of fame or money has ever filled." Zoe studied him, beginning to understand. "So this house, this restoration, it's about healing. That wound?" "Partly," Michael nodded. "But it's bigger than just me." He gestured to the photographs covering the walls. "Everyone in our neighborhood has a story. Everyone was affected by what happened here, not just by my family's eviction, but by all the changes that swept through this community over the years." Zoe moved closer to the map, noticing that many of the pins marked locations far from Wilmington: Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, even overseas. "What exactly are you planning, Michael?" she asked. Michael walked to a vintage photo pinned at the center of the display, a faded color snapshot of a neighborhood block party from the summer of 1971. Children with ice cream cones, parents chatting, a sprinkler spraying in the background. Everyone smiling, unaware of the changes and challenges that lay ahead. He pointed to the picture. "Everyone in this photograph," he said. "I need to find every single one of them." Zoe studied the photo, recognizing her younger self standing next to Rosalind Jordan, both girls with matching pigtails and gap-toothed smiles. "Why?" she asked simply. Michael's eyes held a mixture of determination and something else. Hope, perhaps. "Because some stories can only be healed when everyone who was part of them comes together again." Zoe studied Michael's face, seeing the vulnerable boy behind the famous man's exterior. "I have connections through my work," she said finally. "I can help you find people." Over the next few weeks, Zoe and Michael worked together to locate the remaining neighbors from their childhood. Each name on the list came with its own challenges and surprises. Marcus Daniels had been the neighborhood bully, a teenager who terrorized younger kids and once broke Michael's toy basketball hoop on purpose. Now, after serving time in prison, as a young man, he worked as an advocate for prison reform in Atlanta. The Marcus Daniels who pushed kids into mud puddles for fun is now giving TED Talks about compassion? Zoe shook her head in disbelief as she showed Michael the article she'd found. "People change," Michael said, adding Marcus's contact information to their list. "Sometimes the hardest people had the hardest lives." Sofia Garcia's family had run the corner grocery store where all the neighborhood children bought penny candy and sodas. A search revealed that Sofia now owned a successful chain of restaurants across the Southeast. Tyler Brooks had shared Michael's passion for basketball and had been his first real competition on the court. His promising career ended with a devastating knee injury during his college years. Now, he coached high school basketball in Charlotte. For each person they located, Michael prepared a special invitation, a handcrafted card, containing a small photograph of the old neighborhood and the same message: "The past is waiting. June 15th, 2 p.m. MJ." "Do you think they'll come?" Zoe asked, as they sealed the 20th envelope. "Not all of them," Michael admitted, "but enough." Meanwhile, Dexter Washington continued to observe the activity across the street with growing curiosity. Since the day he'd helped deliver the sofa, he had practiced the dribbling technique. Michael showed him for hours every day. His ball handling had improved so much that his coach had noticed during summer league practice. One rainy afternoon, Dexter was practicing in his driveway despite the weather, determined not to miss a day. The basketball splashed through puddles as he repeated the drill over and over. From his temporary apartment window, Michael watched the boy's dedication with approval. When the rain intensified into a downpour, he grabbed an umbrella and walked across the street. "You're going to catch pneumonia," Michael called over the sound of rainfall. Dexter looked up, water streaming down his face. "Can't afford to miss practice." "No, but you can practice inside." Michael gestured toward the Jordan house. "Come on." Dexter followed, leaving puddles on the porch as they entered. Michael handed him a towel. "Dry off before you slip and break something." While Dexter toweled his hair, Michael disappeared into another room, returning with a steaming mug of hot chocolate. "My mother's recipe," he said, handing it to Dexter. "Secret ingredient is a pinch of cinnamon." The boy sipped gratefully. "Thanks, Mr. Jordan." "Call me Michael." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Finally, Dexter gathered his courage to ask the question that had been bothering him. "The other day, I heard you talking about finding people who used to live here. What's that all about?" Michael studied the boy, considering how much to share. "I'm gathering people from my past, the ones who were here when everything changed for me." "Because of the eviction?" Michael nodded. "When I was 9, not much older than your little sister, we had to leave this house with only what we could carry. Dad had lost his job at the factory. Mom was working 2 jobs as a maid, but it wasn't enough." Dexter listened intently. "That night, sleeping on my aunt's sofa, I made a promise to myself. I promised I'd become so successful that my mother would never have to worry about money again, that no one could ever take our home away." Michael's eyes grew distant. "I kept that promise, but something was still missing." "What?" "Closure," Michael said simply. "Some wounds don't heal just because time passes." Dexter nodded, thinking of how he still missed his grandmother every day. "Come on," Michael said, standing. "I want to show you something." He led Dexter to the basement door. Unlike the rest of the house, which had been restored to its 1970s condition, the basement had been completely transformed. As Michael flipped on the lights, Dexter gasped. The space was filled with brand-new basketball equipment, shooting machines, dribbling aids, strength training equipment, and a half-court with cushioned flooring. One wall held a huge video screen. Another was lined with educational materials, books, a computer station, and learning software. "What is all this?" Dexter asked in amazement. "This isn't just about the past," Michael said, watching the boy's reaction. "It's about the future." 2. Before Dexter could ask more questions, the doorbell rang. Michael checked his watch. "That'll be Tyler Brooks. He's early." He turned to Dexter. "How would you like to help me with something important?" "Sure, anything. I'm gathering people from the neighborhood, the ones who lived here when I was a kid. I could use an assistant to help me manage everything." Dexter's eyes widened. "You want me to help?" You've got a good heart and strong hands. That's what I need right now." "Yes, sir. I mean, Michael. I'd be honored." Michael smiled. "Good. Starting today, you're officially part of the team." As they walked upstairs, Dexter's mind raced with questions. Why was Michael Jordan, the greatest basketball player ever, so focused on a 50-year-old? Eviction? What did he hope to accomplish by bringing all these people together? And what did the high-tech basement have to do with any of it? When Michael opened the front door, a tall man with graying hair and a knee brace stood on the porch. "Michael Jordan," the man said, shaking his head in wonder. "When I got your invitation, I couldn't believe it." "Tyler Brooks," Michael replied with a warm smile. "You're the first to arrive. Come in and meet my assistant, Dexter." As Tyler entered, his eyes filled with tears at the sight of the perfectly restored living room. "It looks exactly the same," he whispered. "Even the scratch on the coffee table, where I dropped my skates that time." Michael nodded, pleased. Nothing's been forgotten. Not a single detail. More doorbells rang throughout the afternoon. With each arrival, Dexter watched as middle-aged and elderly visitors entered the house and reacted with astonishment to the meticulous recreation of their shared past. Some laughed, some cried, but all seemed deeply moved by what Michael had created. What Dexter couldn't understand was why. What was the purpose behind this elaborate reunion? And what was Michael planning to reveal in the locked room upstairs that everyone kept asking about? The morning of the main gathering arrived. With perfect June weather, warm sunshine, a gentle breeze, and clear blue skies. Michael had been up since dawn, making final preparations. Dexter arrived early as instructed, finding Michael arranging old-fashioned lemonade and cookies on platters in the kitchen. "Just like my mother used to serve," Michael explained. "She believed you couldn't have guests without offering something sweet." Dexter nodded, picking up a kitchen towel to help dry the glasses Michael had washed. "How many people are coming today?" 19 confirmed. A few maybes. Michael checked his watch. "Zoe should be here any minute to help." As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Dexter opened it to find Zoe holding a large photo album. "Found this in my attic," she said, stepping inside. "Thought it might be useful." Michael eagerly took the album, flipping through pages of faded photographs showing neighborhood children playing, adults chatting at barbecues, and holiday celebrations from decades past. "This is perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." For the next hour, the three of them prepared the house. Dexter arranged chairs in the living room. Zoe set up name tags, each featuring a small photo of the person as a child, alongside their current name. Michael kept checking and rechecking. Details, straightening picture frames, adjusting curtains, making sure everything was perfect. "Nervous?" Zoe asked him quietly. "It's been 50 years, Michael replied. "Some of these people might not be happy to see me." Zoe squeezed his arm reassuringly. Everyone was thrilled to be invited, even Marcus. The doorbell rang again at exactly 2 p.m. The first guests had arrived. Dexter opened the door to a gray-haired couple, the Wilsons, who had lived next door to the Jordans. Mrs. Wilson immediately burst into tears upon seeing the perfectly restored house. "Oh my goodness," she sobbed. "It's like stepping back in time." More guests arrived in quick succession. Sofia Garcia, carrying a tray of pastries from her restaurant. Tyler Brooks, who had come early the day before. The Cooper twins, now balding and with matching paunches. but still finishing each other's sentences, and Marcus Daniels, who entered hesitantly, as if unsure of his welcome. Marcus approached Michael directly. "I owe you an apology that's 50 years overdue," he said, extending his hand. "I was horrible to you as a kid." Michael shook his hand firmly. "We were children. Besides, I heard you're doing good work now." Marcus looked surprised. "You've been keeping tabs on me?" "On everyone," Michael replied. "This gathering isn't about dwelling on past hurts. It's about reconnection." As more guests arrived, the initial awkwardness melted into genuine warmth. Old friends embraced. Former neighbors marveled at how their life paths had diverged and occasionally intersected. They shared stories of their children and grandchildren, their careers and retirements, their triumphs and challenges. Dexter moved through the crowd, serving refreshments and listening to the conversations with fascination. These ordinary-seeming people had watched Michael Jordan grow up, had known him before fame and fortune. They spoke of him not as a basketball legend, but as Little Mike, or James and Dolores's boy, the skinny kid with the big dreams. Several people noticed the locked door upstairs and asked about it, but Michael simply smiled and said, "Later." Mid-afternoon, the living room was filled with laughter and conversation. Michael stood in the doorway, watching with satisfaction as connections were renewed. Zoe appeared at his side. "You did it," she said softly. "You brought everyone back together." "Not everyone," Michael replied. "My parents didn't live to see this." "They're here in spirit," Zoe assured him. "Look around. Everyone's sharing stories about them." It was true. In one corner, Mrs. Wilson was describing Dolores Jordan's famous sweet potato pie to Sophia. In another, Tyler was recounting how James Jordan had taught neighborhood kids to change a car tire. "Your parents touched so many lives," Zoe continued. "Their legacy lives on through these memories and through you." Michael nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I wish my siblings could have made it." "They'll be here for the next gathering," Zoe reminded him. "This is just the beginning." Dexter approached with a message that another guest had arrived, a late addition to the list. Michael excused himself and went to the door, returning moments later with an older woman. Dexter didn't recognize. "Everyone," Michael called, his voice cutting through the chatter. "I'd like you to meet someone special. This is Mrs. Hayes. She was my third-grade teacher." A small woman with silver hair and bright eyes smiled at the group. "I can't believe little Michael remembered me after all these years," she said, "though I've certainly never forgotten him." She patted Michael's arm. Even at 9, he had such determination. "When I heard about the eviction, I worried for all the Jordan children, but especially Michael. He took it so hard." The room grew quiet as Mrs. Hayes spoke. "The day after they moved, he came to school with his clothes a bit wrinkled. They were living with relatives, you see, but his homework was perfect. I asked how he managed it, and he said, 'My daddy says just because things are hard doesn't mean you stop trying.'" Tears glistened in several people's eyes. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from celebratory to something deeper. "I think it's time," Zoe whispered to Michael. He nodded and raised his voice again. "Friends, thank you all for coming today. Having you here in this house that holds so many memories for all of us means more than I can express." The group quieted, all eyes on Michael. 50 years ago, my family was evicted from this house. We packed what we could fit in our car and left behind not just a building, but a community. all of you." Michael gestured around the room. "That day changed my life, but not in the way you might think." He moved to the center of the room where everyone could see him clearly. "I'd like to share my memory of that day with you. Then, if you're willing, I'd love to hear your stories too." Michael took a deep breath. "Because that's why I've brought you all here, to share our stories. The happy ones, the difficult ones, the ones that shaped us. Because together, they form something larger than any one of us alone." Dexter stood in the corner, camera in hand as Michael had instructed him, recording as Michael began to speak about the day his family was evicted. The famous basketball star wasn't talking about championships or fame or fortune. Instead, he spoke of shame, of fear, of a child's confusion watching his parents' dignity challenged. As Michael's story unfolded, Dexter finally began to understand. This wasn't just about a house or a childhood memory. This was about something much deeper, something that had driven Michael Jordan to greatness, but had also left a wound that all his success had never fully healed. Dexter glanced at the locked door upstairs. Whatever was behind it was the key to understanding Michael's true purpose, and soon, he suspected, that door would finally be opened. The living room was silent as Michael continued his story. Even the usual creaks of the old house seemed to still, as if the building itself was listening. "That morning started like any other," Michael said. "I was eating breakfast, arguing with my brother Larry about whose turn it was to take out the trash. Mom was ironing Dad's work shirt. Then there was a knock at the door." He described how two men in suits had handed his father papers, speaking in low voices. How his father's shoulders had slumped as he read the documents. How his mother had started crying quietly at the kitchen table. "They gave us 48 hours, Michael said. 2 days to pack up our lives. Dad had been out of work for 3 months. Mom's cleaning jobs weren't enough. The landlord had been patient, but his patience had run out." Michael walked to the window, looking out at the street where he'd once played. "That night, I overheard my parents talking. Dad was blaming himself. Mom was trying to comfort him, even through her own tears. I decided then that I would never let my family feel that helpless again. I promised myself that one day I'd buy my mother a house that nobody could ever take away." He turned back to face the room. "Many of you saw us leave. Some of you helped us pack. Others brought food or offered places to store things we couldn't take. That kindness, I've never forgotten it." Several people nodded, remembering their small acts of assistance. "What you didn't see was what happened after," Michael continued. "We moved in with my aunt temporarily. 5 of us in her spare bedroom. I slept on the floor for 6 months. But every day, Dad got up and looked for work. Mom took on a 3rd job. They never complained, never gave up." Michael's voice grew stronger. "That eviction could have broken us. Instead, it fueled me. Every time I felt like quitting on the basketball court, I remembered that feeling. Watching my parents pack our belongings, seeing my sisters cry as they chose which toys they could keep. It lit a fire in me that never went out." Tears flowed freely among the listeners now. Mrs. Wilson dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. The Cooper twins stared at their hands, perhaps remembering how they'd excluded the young Michael from their games. "I achieved everything I dreamed of," Michael said. "Championships, Olympic gold, success, beyond anything I could have imagined as that 9-year-old boy." I bought my parents a beautiful home, just like I promised myself. But something was still missing. He gestured around the room. This connection, this community, this shared history. That's why I brought you all here today. Not just to reminisce, but to heal. Because that day didn't just change my family's life. It touched all of yours, too. Michael looked at Marcus Daniels. Marcus, would you be willing to share your story? How that time affected you? Marcus seemed surprised to be called on, but he stood, his tall frame commanding attention, despite his obvious nervousness. Most of you remember me as the neighborhood bully, he began with a self-deprecating smile. What you probably didn't know was that my father was an alcoholic who used his fists when he was angry, which was most of the time. The day the Jordans were evicted, I watched from across the street. I remember thinking, that could be us next. Marcus described how the Jordan family's dignity during their eviction had affected him deeply. They held their heads high. No screaming, no fighting, just quiet strength. Mrs. Jordan even thanked the men who came to oversee the eviction. It was a lesson in grace I never forgot. He explained how his own family had fallen apart the following year, how he'd ended up in juvenile detention after a series of poor choices, and how a prison counselor had eventually helped him turn his life around. Watching the Jordan family that day showed me there was a different way to face hardship, Marcus concluded. It took me years to understand that lesson, but it eventually led me to my life's work, helping others find dignity in their darkest moments. One by one, others shared their stories. Sofia Garcia described how her family nearly lost their corner store the same year, and how the community had rallied to help them. The day after the Jordans left, Mrs. Cooper organized a neighborhood meeting in our store, Sofia recalled. Everyone agreed to pay a little extra for their groceries to help us stay afloat. That's why my parents were able to keep the business going. Tyler Brooks spoke about learning perseverance from watching Michael practice basketball for hours after the eviction. Even after everything his family had been through, he was out there on the court every day. Rain or shine. That showed me what real determination looked like. As each person spoke, Dexter moved around the room with the camera, recording their stories as Michael had instructed. The atmosphere grew increasingly emotional as decades of unspoken connections were revealed. Stories overlapped and intersected in ways none of them had realized. Mrs. Hayes shared how she'd incorporated the Jordan family's experience into her teaching, using it to help other children facing hardship. The Cooper twins admitted their shame at having excluded Michael from their games. Mrs. Wilson revealed that she'd kept in touch with Dolores Jordan for years, exchanging Christmas cards and following Michael's career through his Mother's Proud updates. Through it all, Michael listened intently, occasionally nodding or wiping away a tear. Zoe sat beside him, sometimes adding details to stories or gently prompting quieter guests to share their memories. What emerged was a tapestry of interconnected lives, a community that had faced economic hardship, racial tensions, and social changes together during the early 1970s. The Jordan family's eviction, they realized, had been just one thread in a larger pattern that had affected them all. I never knew, Michael said when the stories paused. I never knew how much we all went through together, how much we shared. That's the thing about childhood, Mrs. Hayes said gently. We experience everything in isolation, thinking our joys and struggles are uniquely our own. It's only later that we realize how connected we all were. A comfortable silence fell over the room. The afternoon sun cast warm patterns on the vintage furniture. For a moment, it seemed as if time had folded in on itself, as if they were both their current selves and their younger versions simultaneously. "I believe," Michael said finally, rising to his feet, "it's time to show you what's upstairs." Excited murmurs rippled through the group. Dexter felt his heart rate quicken. At last, the mystery would be revealed. Michael led the way up the narrow staircase, the old steps creaking under the weight of so many people. At the door to the mysterious room, he paused, key in hand. "What you're about to see is just the beginning," he said. "A first step towards something I hope will honor all our stories." The key turned in the lock. The door swung open. And, as the gathered neighbors stepped inside, gasps of amazement and wonder filled the air. Dexter, bringing up the rear with his camera, couldn't yet see what had caused such a reaction. But he knew in that moment that whatever Michael Jordan had created in that room had just changed everything. As he finally crossed the threshold, Dexter's own breath caught in his throat. The space before him was unlike anything he could have imagined. The room was a multimedia archive of the neighborhood's history, a perfect blend of museum, art installation, and memory vault. The walls were covered with photographs, documents, maps, and recordings that Michael had spent years collecting. But, unlike the scattered arrangement Zoe had seen weeks earlier, everything was now organized into a beautiful, cohesive display. One wall documented the neighborhood's origins in the 1940s, showing its development from empty lots to the first houses. Another tracked the changes through the 1960s and early 70s, when most of the gathered neighbors had lived there. Historical context was provided through newspaper headlines about civil rights movements, economic changes, and local events that had shaped their community. What struck Dexter most powerfully were the life timelines that ran around the room's perimeter. Each person present had their own panel, starting with childhood photos from the neighborhood and continuing through the decades, showing their journeys, accomplishments, families, and contributions to society. "How did you gather all this?" Mrs. Wilson whispered, staring at a photo of her younger self, planting flowers in her front yard. "Years of research," Michael replied. "News archives, public records, social media, interviews with family members." Tyler Brooks stood transfixed. Before his timeline, which showed his basketball career, the devastating injury that ended it, and his transition to coaching. "You even found photos from my state championship game," he said, voice thick with emotion. One wall was dedicated to those who had passed away, honored with stories collected from relatives and friends. James and Dolores Jordan held a central place in this memorial section, surrounded by other parents and neighbors who had been part of the community. In the center of the room stood a large table holding an architectural model of the entire neighborhood as it was in the 1970s. Every house was meticulously detailed, right down to the color of the shutters and the toys left in yards. Tiny figures represented the children and adults who had populated those streets. "This is incredible," Marcus said, leaning down to examine the model. "You even included my dog, Rusty." He pointed to a small brown figure in his family's yard. "Rusty used to chase me every time I rode my bike past your house," Michael laughed. As the group moved around the room, exclaiming over memories and connections they'd forgotten, Sofia Garcia asked the question on everyone's mind. "Michael, this is beautiful, but why? Why go to such extraordinary lengths to preserve all this?" Michael moved to a table near the window where architectural drawings were laid out. Because this house and this archive are just the beginning, he explained. For years, I've been troubled by how communities like ours, working-class neighborhoods, whose residents achieve extraordinary things, often have their histories erased. Our stories aren't preserved in history books or museums. He gestured around the room. But these stories matter. Your lives matter. The community we built together matters. Michael unrolled a larger set of plans across the table. I'm establishing a foundation dedicated to preserving the stories of communities like ours. This house will serve as the first location, HU combination, of museum, community center, and educational resource. The group gathered around the plans, listening intently as Michael outlined his vision. The foundation will provide scholarships for local students, he continued. It will support community development initiatives, create documentary resources, and help people facing housing insecurity, so other families might avoid what mine went through. Mrs. Hayes wiped away tears. You're using your success to lift others up. It's what my parents taught me, Michael said simply. Dad always said success isn't measured by how high you climb, but by how many people you bring with you. As the group continued exploring the room, Dexter found himself drawn to a corner display about the current neighborhood. Recent photographs showed his own house, his mother tending to her flower beds, his little sister riding her bike, the present day seamlessly connected to the past. I included you too, Michael said, appearing at Dexter's side. Because you're part of this story now. The neighborhood continues through you and your family. Dexter felt a swell of pride, seeing his ordinary life presented as something worthy of documentation. Thank you, he managed to say. Zoe joined them, examining the architectural plans more closely. This is wonderful, Michael. But people are wondering about the timing. Why now, 50 years after the eviction? Michael hesitated. There's one final part of the story I need to share. He checked his watch. But first, there's someone else who should be here. He turned to Dexter. Can you go downstairs and check if our last guest has arrived? Trey should have brought him by now. Curious, Dexter hurried downstairs. In the living room, he found Michael's assistant, Trey, standing beside an elderly man in a wheelchair. The man looked to be in his 90s, frail and nervous, his thin hands clutching the arms of his wheelchair. Mr. Jordan asked me to check if you'd arrived, Dexter said. The old man nodded. Is everyone up there already? Yes, sir. They're waiting. A look of fear crossed the man's weathered face. Maybe this wasn't such a good idea. Trey placed a reassuring hand on the man's shoulder. Mr. Thompson, Michael wants you here. Tom was very clear about that. Dexter helped Trey navigate the wheelchair to the base of the stairs. The narrow staircase wouldn't accommodate the chair, so with the old man's permission, they carefully carried him up, step by step. When they reached the room, a hush fell over the gathered neighbors. Michael approached the elderly man, whose eyes darted nervously around the room. Everyone, Michael said, his voice steady but solemn. I'd like you to meet Mr. Harold Thompson. Dexter noticed several people stiffen in recognition. Some of you might remember Mr. Thompson, Michael continued. He was our landlord, the man who evicted my family 50 years ago. The silence in the room deepened. Some guests looked confused, others uncomfortable. A few appeared angry. Mr. Thompson's shoulders hunched as if expecting condemnation, but Michael placed a gentle hand on the old man's arm and moved his wheelchair to the center of the room. facing the gathered neighbors. "Mr. Thompson has something he'd like to share with us," Michael said. "And his story is an essential part of why we're all here today." Dexter raised his camera again, sensing that whatever was about to happen would be the most important moment of the entire gathering. The room was so quiet that the soft whirring of his camera seemed loud. Every eye was fixed on the elderly man in the wheelchair, Mr. Harold Thompson, the landlord who had evicted the Jordan family 50 years ago. Some of the older guests clearly recognized him, their expressions a mix of surprise and unease. Others looked confused, whispering questions to neighbors. Marcus Daniels stood with his arms crossed, face tense with barely contained anger. Mr. Thompson looked frail and frightened in his wheelchair. At 92, his once imposing frame had shrunk with age, his hands trembling slightly as they rested on the armrests. When he lifted his gaze to address the room, his voice was thin but determined. "I don't deserve to be here," he began. "Most of you probably remember me as the heartless landlord who put families out on the street." He paused, his breathing labored. "And you would be right to think of me that way." Michael stood silently beside him, his expression unreadable. 50 years ago, I owned several properties in this neighborhood," Mr. Thompson continued. "I was going through a difficult time, a messy divorce, financial problems, my own father dying of cancer. I took my frustrations out on my tenants, especially those who fell behind on rent." He looked directly at Michael. "The Jordans were good people. James always fixed things around the house himself, saving me money on repairs. Dolores kept the place spotless. They were only 3 months behind, and they'd been making partial payments." His voice caught. "There was no good reason to evict them. I was just angry at the world, and they were convenient targets." Mrs. Wilson made a small sound of distress. Sofia Garcia reached over to squeeze her hand. "After evicting the Jordans, my life spiraled downward," Mr. Thompson admitted. "I lost my properties to the bank, developed a drinking problem, spent years homeless myself." His gaze swept across the room. "Ironic, isn't it? The man who made others homeless ended up without a roof over his head." Mr. Thompson explained how he had eventually rebuilt his life, becoming an advocate for affordable housing and tenant rights. For 20 years, he had volunteered with organizations helping low-income families avoid eviction. "I never knew that the little boy from apartment 4C became the famous Michael Jordan until recently," he said. "When I saw a news story about him buying this house, I was shocked. All these years, I never made the connection." He turned to face Michael directly. "The truth is, I reached out to Mr. Jordan several years ago. I found his business address and sent a letter asking for forgiveness. I didn't expect a response, and I didn't get one." Michael nodded confirmation. "I received your letter, Mr. Thompson. I wasn't ready then." "I understood that," the old man said. "Why would you forgive someone who caused your family such pain? I wouldn't have forgiven me either." Michael moved to stand in front of the gathered neighbors, positioned between them and Mr. Thompson. "When Mr. Thompson's letter arrived 5 years ago, I was angry. I tore it up without finishing it. I had achieved everything I'd ever dreamed of. Championships, business success, a beautiful family. I thought I'd moved beyond that painful day." Michael's voice grew softer. "But the truth was, I hadn't. That eviction shaped me in ways I never fully acknowledged. The drive that made me great on the court came partly from the determination that no one would ever make me feel that powerless again." He looked around at the familiar faces, When I decided to buy this house, to restore it exactly as it was, I knew there was still something unfinished, a wound that hadn't healed, despite all my success. Michael returned to Mr. Thompson's side and, to everyone's surprise, knelt beside the wheelchair to be at eye level with the elderly man. Last month, my assistant found Mr. Thompson in a retirement community in Florida, Michael explained. I asked him to come here today because his story is part of all our stories. His actions touched all our lives, for better or worse. Mr. Thompson's eyes filled with tears. I've carried the guilt of that eviction my entire life. It haunts me still. I know an apology isn't enough, but it's all I have to offer. His voice broke. I am so sorry for the pain I caused your family, Michael. The room held its collective breath. Decades of pain and regret hung in the air between the two men. One who had once wielded power without compassion, and one who had risen from that painful moment to achieve extraordinary success. Michael took Mr. Thompson's trembling hand in his. I forgive you. The words, simple but profound, seemed to echo in the quiet room. I forgive you, Michael repeated, not just for myself, but for my parents, who aren't here to speak for themselves. They would have wanted this healing too. Tears streamed down Mr. Thompson's weathered face. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't about what's deserved, Michael replied gently. It's about breaking the chains that bind us to the past. He looked up at the gathered neighbors. That's what today is really about. Not just remembering, but releasing. Not just connecting, but healing. The emotional impact of the moment rippled through the room. Mrs. Hayes wiped away tears. The Cooper twins looked at each other, communicating without words, as twins often do. Marcus. Daniels, who had entered looking defensive and angry, uncrossed. His arms, his expression, softening. Dexter, recording it all through his camera lens, felt a lump in his throat. He had expected this gathering to be about Michael Jordan's fame, about a celebrity giving back to his community. Instead, he was witnessing something far more powerful, a moment of profound human connection and forgiveness that transcended status and success. This, Dexter realized, was Michael Jordan's greatest achievement, not the championships or the fortune, but the courage to confront his deepest wound and transform it into healing, not just for himself, but for an entire community. And somehow, without quite understanding why, Dexter knew that this moment would change his own life too. In the wake of Michael's forgiveness, a profound shift seemed to ripple through the room. The tension that had built when Mr. Thompson arrived dissolved, replaced by something Dexter couldn't quite name. A collective exhale, perhaps, or the release of a weight many hadn't known they were carrying. One by one, other neighbors began to address their own unresolved feelings. The Cooper twins approached Michael, awkwardly apologizing for excluding him from their basketball games as children. We were just jealous, Jacob Cooper admitted. Even then, you had more natural talent than both of us combined. Michael laughed, embracing them both. Your rejection made me practice harder. I should be thanking you. In another corner, Marcus Daniels knelt beside Mr. Thompson's wheelchair, the former neighborhood bully speaking quietly with the former landlord. Two men who had caused pain in different ways, now united in their journey toward redemption. Sophia Garcia approached Mrs. Hayes, the teacher she'd been too shy to thank properly as a child. "Your encouragement was the reason I applied for business school," Sophia told her. "You changed my life." Misunderstandings that had festered for decades were addressed and resolved. Old wounds began to heal. Throughout it all, Dexter kept recording, understanding now that he was documenting something extraordinary: the transformation of individual memories into a shared story of resilience and reconciliation. After nearly an hour of these spontaneous connections, Michael called for everyone's attention again. "What's happening in this room right now," he said, gesturing to the various conversations, "is exactly why I brought you all together. Healing doesn't happen in isolation. It requires community." He moved to the architectural plans spread across the table. "I want to explain the true purpose of restoring this house. It wasn't just about preserving history or creating a foundation, though. Those are important. It was about healing. For myself, for Mr. Thompson, and for our entire community." Michael traced his finger along the drawings. "This house represents a painful memory that I've carried my whole life. By restoring it, by bringing you all here, I wanted to transform it into something positive, to change the story." Zoe stood beside him, adding, "What Michael has done here is remarkable. He's taken a site of trauma and turned it into a place of reconciliation." Michael smiled at her gratefully before continuing, "But this is just the beginning of what I hope to accomplish." He rolled out a larger set of blueprints. "I want to show you the full vision for what I'm calling Jordan Roots." Gasps filled the room as the group gathered around the new plans. They showed the restored house at the center of a much larger community complex. Surrounding it were modern buildings containing sports facilities, educational resources, career training centers, and affordable housing units. "The house we're standing in now is just the first building," Michael explained. "Over the past 5 years, I've quietly purchased the surrounding properties. The Jordan Roots complex will revitalize this entire neighborhood without displacing current residents." Mr. Patterson, who had complained about basketballs in his Abides garden all those years ago, looked astonished. "You're building all this here? Why not somewhere fancier?" "Because this is where my roots are," Michael replied simply. "This neighborhood shaped me. Now I want to help shape its future." He outlined his vision. The house would remain as a museum and gathering place. The sports facilities would provide training for young athletes, regardless of their ability to pay. The educational center would offer tutoring, college preparation, and adult learning opportunities. The affordable housing would ensure that families never face the kind of housing insecurity his family had experienced. "Every aspect of this project," Michael said, "is designed to address the challenges we all faced. Growing up here, lack of resources, limited opportunities, housing insecurity." Mrs. Hayes raised her hand. "What can we do to help?" Michael smiled. "That's actually my next question for all of you. I'd like to invite everyone in this room to become founding board members of the Jordan Roots Foundation. Each of you brings unique experiences and skills. Together, we can build something extraordinary." The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Sofia Garcia offered to develop culinary training programs through her restaurants. Marcus Daniels volunteered to create initiatives for at-risk youth. Tyler Brooks proposed coaching basketball clinics. Mrs. Hayes suggested a tutoring program matching retired teachers with students. Ideas flowed freely, each person finding their own way to contribute. As Dexter recorded these conversations, he noticed Michael watching him thoughtfully. "Dexter," Michael called, You haven't said what role you might play." Put on the spot, Dexter lowered his camera, feeling self-conscious. "I'm just a kid, Mr. Jordan. I don't have anything special to offer." Michael crossed the room to stand beside him. "I disagree. You have a unique perspective as Evicted, part of the next generation of this neighborhood. Plus," he added with a smile, "you've been documenting everything today. Those recordings will be the foundation of our oral history satire project." Dexter looked down at the camera in his hands with new appreciation. "There's something else," Michael continued, guiding Dexter toward the window. Outside, they could see the empty lot behind the house where foundation work had already begun on the first new building. "Remember the basketball equipment in the basement?" Dexter nodded. "That's for a mentorship program I'm launching. Young players teaching even younger ones, creating a chain of support and skill building." Michael placed a hand on Dexter's shoulder. "I'd like you to help lead it." "Me?" Dexter's eyes widened. "But I'm not even the best player on my school team." "This isn't about being the best," Michael said. "It's about giving your best. I've seen how you work, your dedication to improving. That's what I want these kids to learn." For the first time, Dexter understood why Michael had noticed him practicing in the rain that day, why he'd shown him that dribbling technique, why he'd asked for his help during the gathering. It hadn't been random kindness. Michael had been seeing something in him that Dexter hadn't yet seen in himself. As the conversations continued around them, Michael pulled Dexter and Zoe aside. "I have one more surprise planned," he said quietly, "and I'll need help from both of you to pull it off." Later, as the evening light began to fade, the group moved downstairs to the living room. The atmosphere was celebratory now, the initial awkwardness completely gone. These people who had once been neighbors, then strangers for decades, had reconnected in profound ways. Michael stood in the center of the room, watching with satisfaction. The house that had once represented his family's lowest moment now hummed with laughter, storytelling, and plans for the future. Dexter, recording it all, realized he was witnessing the moment when the cliffhanger of Michael's mysterious project was finally being revealed. This wasn't just about a basketball legend buying back his childhood home. It was about transforming pain into purpose, about using success to create opportunity for others. And as Michael prepared to share his final surprise with the group, Dexter sensed that the most extraordinary part of the story was still to come. Michael's voice quieted the room. "Before we end today's gathering, there's one more person I'd like you to meet." He nodded to Zoe, who slipped out of the room. "When my family was evicted," Michael continued, "we lost touch with many of you. But the hardest part for me was being separated from this community that had been my whole world." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. "Today is about reconnection. But there's someone who couldn't be here, someone who was, perhaps, the most important person in my life during those difficult days." The front door opened, and Zoe returned with an elderly woman leaning on a walker. Her silver hair was styled elegantly, and despite her age, she stood tall and dignified. "Many of you will remember my mother, Dolores Jordan," Michael said, crossing the room to take her arm. Gasps and exclamations filled the room. Several of the older neighbors rushed forward to embrace Mrs. Jordan, who beamed with pleasure at seeing so many familiar faces. "Mom insisted on surprising you all," Michael explained, guiding her to the place of honor in his father's old armchair. "She's been helping me plan this gathering for months." "I wouldn't have missed it for the world," Dolores said, her voice strong despite her 83 years. "Seeing all of you here, in this house again," her voice trembled slightly. "It's a miracle!" Mrs. Wilson knelt beside the chair, clasping Dolores's hand. "We've missed you, Dee." "I've missed you all too," Dolores replied. Her gaze traveled around the room, taking in the perfectly restored details. "Michael, you've done an amazing job. It looks exactly as I remember." "I had good motivation," Michael said softly, "and an excellent memory." For the next hour, Dolores Jordan held court, sharing stories about raising her children, in the house and catching up with old friends. When Mr. Thompson was wheeled over to meet her, a hush fell over the room. "Mrs. Jordan," he began, his voice breaking, "I don't know if you remember me." "Harold Thompson," she interrupted gently. "Of course, I remember you." "I've already apologized to your son," Mr. Thompson said, "but I need to apologize to you too. What I did to your family was unforgivable." Dolores studied him for a long moment. "Nothing is unforgivable, Mr. Thompson. Life is too short to carry such burdens." With a grace that brought tears to many eyes, she reached out and placed her hand over his. "I forgive you. James would have too." As the evening wound down, Michael announced that cars were waiting outside to take everyone home, with invitations to return for the groundbreaking ceremony for the new buildings in 2 weeks. One by one, the guests said their goodbyes, exchanging phone numbers and promises to stay in touch. The Cooper twins invited Marcus Daniels to their weekly golf game. Sofia Garcia offered Mrs. Hayes a lifetime of free meals at her restaurants. Tyler Brooks arranged to meet Michael for a one-on-one basketball game. "So I can finally beat you," he joked. Soon, only Michael, Dolores, Zoe, and Dexter remained in the quiet house. "You did good, son," Dolores said, patting Michael's hand. "Your father would be proud." "I hope so, Mom," Michael replied. "This was for both of you." Dexter, still recording, captured this intimate family moment. Michael noticed and smiled, not minding the documentation. "Dexter, would you walk my mother out to the car?" Michael asked, "I need a minute with Zoe." As Dexter helped Mrs. Jordan navigate the porch steps, she studied him with kind eyes. "You remind me of Michael at your age," she said. "Always watching, always thinking." "That's a big compliment," Dexter replied, touched by the comparison. "He sees something special in you," she continued, "and so do I." When they returned, Michael and Zoe were waiting on the porch. Final goodbyes were said, and Dolores was helped into a waiting luxury sedan. "I'll see you tomorrow, Mom," Michael promised, kissing her cheek. As the car pulled away, Michael turned to Dexter. "Thank you for your help today. Would you mind if I keep the camera overnight? I'd like to review the footage." "Of course," Dexter said, handing it over. "It was an honor to be part of this." "Your part is just beginning," Michael replied with a smile. "I'll see you at the groundbreaking." 1 year later, the Jordan Roots complex celebrated its grand opening. The original house stood at the center, unchanged, while modern facilities had risen around it. The transformation was remarkable, not just of the physical space, but of the entire neighborhood. A gleaming sports center offered state-of-the-art training facilities. An education building hummed with activity, from children's after-school programs to adult career training. The first phase of affordable housing units was fully occupied, with residents selected from families with housing insecurity. The neighborhood had been revitalized without displacing current residents. Property values had increased, but long-term protections ensured that original neighbors wouldn't be priced out. All the people from the gathering had found ways to contribute, Zoe ran family support services, helping households navigate financial challenges. Marcus Daniels developed programs for at-risk youth, sharing his own story of transformation. Sofia Garcia's restaurants provided culinary training and job opportunities. Tyler Brooks coached basketball, mentoring young players with professional aspirations. Dexter, now on a full college scholarship, courtesy of the Jordan Roots Foundation, returned on weekends to lead the youth mentorship program. Under his guidance, neighborhood children learned not just basketball skills but also discipline, teamwork, and perseverance. Mr. Thompson, despite his failing health, visited regularly to share his story as a cautionary tale about the impact of evictions on families. His sessions with community landlords had already prevented dozens of evictions through mediation and assistance programs. On this sunny June day, exactly 1 year after the gathering, Michael stood on a stage erected in front of the house, preparing to cut the ribbon on the completed complex. Hundreds of community members had gathered for the celebration. The original neighbors sat in places of honor in the front row, alongside Dolores Jordan in her wheelchair. As Michael addressed the crowd, he reflected on the journey. 1 year ago, we gathered in this house to heal old wounds and reconnect broken ties. Today, we celebrate how that healing has expanded beyond the walls of one home to transform an entire community. He gestured to the new buildings surrounding them. Jordan Roots isn't about me. It's about all of us. Our shared past, our connected present, and our collective future. It's about turning pain into purpose and loss into legacy. After the ceremony, as the celebration continued around him, Michael slipped away quietly. He walked through the house that had started it all, now serving as a museum and gathering space. He climbed the stairs to his old bedroom, preserved exactly as it had been when he was 9 years old. From the windowsill, he picked up the toy soldier he had found, buried in the yard that day with Olivia. He turned it over in his hand, remembering the boy he had been. Frightened, determined, unaware of the extraordinary journey ahead. Through the window, he could see children playing basketball on the new courts, families picnicking in the community, garden, seniors teaching young people traditional crafts. Among them was Dexter, coaching a group of elementary school children, including a small boy whose determined expression reminded Michael of himself. The boy was talented but small for his age, clearly giving his all to keep up with bigger kids. Michael noticed his worn-out shoes and made a mental note to get him a new pair. Not just any shoes, but ones specifically designed to give him confidence. Shoes that might help him believe he could fly. Michael placed the toy soldier back on the windowsill and smiled. The past would always be part of him, but it no longer defined him. The house that had once represented his family's greatest hardship had become a foundation for countless new beginnings. Some wounds, he had learned, could only be healed by helping others heal theirs too. And some dreams, the ones that truly matter, were big enough to include everyone. As our story of Michael Jordan's journey of healing and community transformation comes to a close, I'd love to know, where are you listening from today? Drop your location in the comments below. If this story of forgiveness and giving back touched your heart, please hit that like button to help spread kindness and inspiration to others. Every like helps more people discover stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more uplifting stories that show the power of second chances and community connection. The subscribe button is right there. It only takes a second, but it means the world to us. And if you're ready for another heartwarming story that will leave you feeling inspired, click on the video appearing on your screen right now. Thank you for being part of our storytelling family.